When you're working on a big project and utilizing sub-assemblies, you don't actually know what it's going to look like until the very end. It's both the most stressful and the most exciting part of the entire project. So let's finish up the last few details on this model and put them together to find out if he looks great or looks like ass. We are nearing the end of my Golden Demon competition project. As much as I wish I could say I was all the way done. But today we're at a pivotal point in the work on this competition piece. You see, we're putting together all the painted sub-assemblies for the very first time, so you're going to be able to see what he looks like at the same time I do. But before we get to that, we've got two little yet very important details to finish painting. Vizek has some long, nasty claws, and while these are smaller details in the grand scheme of the overall size of this model, I think they're pretty important ones. I really want these to be grimy and gnarly, so instead of painting them like an animal's claws, I'm going to paint them like nasty meth head fingernails. Yum. We're going to start with a bright bone base coat because we need the true mid-tone to build off of. The successive layers of color will be a lot more punchy and eye-catching if we start this way as opposed to a darker color like a deeper tan or brown. From there, we embark on an exercise in patience. I'm going to slowly build up thin glazes of Mournfang brown towards the base of each nail. I don't want to do this quickly. I want a smooth fade from that bone color to a rich, warm brown. I make sure to build up more of the layers of this glaze towards the base of each nail so we build up more depth of color there. From there, we add more richness and more depth of color with the best paint that Games Workshop makes, Rhinox hide. And I'm using this just at the base of each nail, and I'm using a layer consistency of this Rhinox hide to outline where the nail meets the finger, so we have a nice dark line separating those two surfaces. I then mix a thinned wash with Seraphim Sepia and a bit of water and put that over the entire fingernail. What this is going to do is add a little bit more depth of color, but it's also going to blend together all of those colors really nicely. Once that thinned wash has dried, I come back in with some highlights, starting with our pure Ushabti bone, building back up on the middle part of each nail, where I assume the nail would be the cleanest. I work in some faint scratches and define edges with each nail as well in this step to help bring some more depth and contrast of texture. The final step on these fingernails is pretty straightforward. I'm going to boost the highlights even further, this time with pure Screaming Skull. Here I'm going to make sure we have really defined bright edges as well as some more brighter scratches across the nail. This will bring back our depth and really showcase where each of these lines of the nail really pops out for the audience when they're looking at them at a distance. That was a lot of words. Too many words, really. All I had to say was just second highlight, Screaming Skull. But I didn't say that. I mean, I did say that, but just in 4 times as many words. With the nails done, we only have one final detail without paint on this model, and that is his cloven hoof. Now, I specifically saved this hoof for last because I found myself using it as a brace point as I painted much of the rest of the model. And I wanted to save this till the end so I didn't paint it and then touch it with my hands all the time and rub off the paint. Now, I did some in-depth online hoof research for a color scheme, and I settled on a warm hoof color that works its way up to a gross yellowish white. I'm starting darker here than the nails, so we'll end up with an overall darker and richer tone. But because this is a fairly large singular shape, I decided to wet blend the base coat of this hoof with a darker brown around the sides and the back of each of the halves. Whenever you wet blend, it's good to double check whether or not that first pass has full opacity. If not, like I didn't here, I came back in with a pure coat of Mournfang brown on all the brighter front-facing areas and made sure I had full opacity before moving on to the next step. Once I'm happy with that, we're going to go back to the glazing step, just like we did on the fingernails, this time with Armor Brown, and I'm pushing this up towards the fleshy knob bit, whatever the technical term for goat ankle is, to darken those areas further. From there, we rework our pure Mournfang brown to get an idea of where more of the light of our pure midtone would catch, and then we're going to push the highlights up pretty far pretty quickly. First by mixing in a yellow ochre color to our base brown, and then we're going to push it even farther with a bone color. An important part of this step is to really accent all of the really interesting texture in the sculpt on this hoof. There's a lot of striations that we want to make sure get hit with highlights. And in general, I'm highlighting both the middle section of the hoof, where more light would catch, as well as the very bottom of the hoof, where that edge would catch more light as well. With those final two details painted, we are officially done with paint on every surface of this model, and now it's time to put all those sub-assemblies together, take a look at the model as a whole, and determine where I need to spend my time between now and Adepticon to get this thing up to Golden Demon standards. Now, there are pros and cons to painting in sub-assemblies. The pros are that you get better access to each separate area to make sure you have the most detail work and every little nook and cranny painted to the best of your abilities. The cons are that while doing that, it requires you to paint everything, put it together, gap fill, paint over those gap fills, and make sure everything still fits together smoothly, and hope that the paint job still looks cohesive when you put it all together. And it's because of those reasons why I almost never paint in sub-assemblies unless it's for competition. Now, my go-to product to ensure we have smooth transitions for plastic models is sprue goo. And if I'm using something that's made of metal or resin, I just use UV resin for this step. What you actually don't need to stress out about right now is messing up your existing paint job. What you're trying to do is ensure you have a smooth transition so there's no gaps, no cracks where your two separate pieces now meet. This is inherently a very stressful time because it looks like you're screwing up the entire work that you just did painting this model. But seasoned painters will not be stressed about this as much because they know the cleanup process, the transition of the paint so it looks like they were one piece to begin with, is not actually as difficult as you'd think. Once your patch job is completely smoothed out and it's dried for 24 hours, you can come back in with a little bit of really high grit sandpaper if you like to smooth it out even more, or if you're happy with how it looks, go right to the paint. And you don't need to bother with primer here. Just put all of the paints that you used to paint that surface the first time on your palette, and with a few thin coats of your paint, you'll have covered up that plastic or resin completely, and then you can build up the natural color transitions that you have on the surrounding areas. Now, as I'm bridging those two separate areas into a single unifying color, I'm doing it with really thin paints. I really want a gradual buildup so I can see how one piece meets with the other with the bridge that we're painting. If I do this too quickly, I can get too big of jumps in the paint colors and it can be harder to fix later. But just take your time here and you'll get a good feel for it, and before you know it, they'll actually look like it was one piece the entire time.
Hey John, are those new glasses? What, these? Oh, they're actually my new sexy goggles, thanks to today's sponsor, Pair Eyewear. You know, I can't believe I didn't try these things sooner. The amount of styles they have available is amazing, their pricing is great, the quality is through the roof, and they can do this. You just find the base rim that speaks to you, select from a variety of colors for that base rim, and then you have the vast ocean of options for your top frames. You see, these top frames magnetically adhere to your base frame, so you can switch up your look without having to buy an additional pair of glasses. And as miniature painters, we know the difference between cheap magnets and quality ones, and these magnets are no joke. The connection is super strong and streamlined, so you can't even tell it's two separate pieces. I'm a massive fan of their top frame sunglass options because I've always hated having to spend that extra money for an entire dedicated pair of prescription sunglasses. They also carry reader glasses, so if you want some comfortable, nice looking readers that aren't going to strain your eyes, these are going to be great at the painting table. I'm so glad that I added these to my order. They're going to get a lot of use here in the studio. And when you order through Pair Eyewear, you're actually helping to give back to those in need. And that's because Pair is a member of the Eye Lions and makes a donation for every new member base frame purchase to ensure communities in need receive all important eye care and quality glasses. So click on the link below or use the QR code on your screen to join me in wearing great priced, high quality, and stylish glasses. And by using that link, you'll get 15% off your first pair as you start your customizable eyewear journey.
All right, let's keep putting this dude together. And when I'm doing this, I want to be precise with my glue application. I'll often use a toothpick or one of these little micro disposable applicators and just dab exactly where I want that super glue to go. Fun side note, you may have noticed in previous videos, if not, I'll show it to you right here, where I scratched up or chipped off paint from his skin while I was test fitting his shoulder armor. Now, this doesn't need to stress you out a whole bunch, especially because that shoulder armor is going to cover up these chips anyway, but in the meantime, every time I look at them, I wince a fair amount. I'll often use a pliers to grip onto the paper clip if I used one to adhere it to the painting handle, and I'll use a small sculpting tool to slowly pull back any putty that the painted piece is stuck to. The last thing you're going to want to do is scratch your model, pull off any paint, or damage it in any way in this part of the process. You've already spent all that time painting, and you might have to do some cleanups as it is, but being careless will just ensure that you're going to have to do more than you wanted to. Remember when I said a minute ago that I chipped some of the paint while I was dry fitting his shoulder armor a couple weeks ago? Well, I realize here that that chipping on his neck is actually still visible once the head is put on. So before I glue that head down, I'm going to clean up those chips on the neck, make sure it's nice and smooth, and I have the right transition of colors before I glue the head down. Again, the color matching in steps like these is a lot easier than you'd think it would be. It's the main reason why I write down every paint that I used for each section of this model, so I wouldn't accidentally pick the wrong color and make my life a lot more difficult and more time spent to get the color match correct. And gluing this head down really is a pretty exciting and nerve-wracking moment for me. I haven't actually tested that head on the body since I built it like 6 months ago. Once I put it on that painting handle with the paper clip and it was glued in, it was not coming off. Yes, sometimes I would put it next to the skin or next to the whatever surface I was painting to make sure the color contrast worked, but I never actually put that head on those shoulders up until right now. Now I've got to remove Vizic's massive body from the wooden painting block, and ideally I wouldn't do this until the model was entirely assembled, all my touch-up and painting work has been done, and he would be ready to be glued to the completed base. But I don't get to do that with this model. You see, he's got this big long rat tail that I need to glue on, and that actually adheres underneath the bottom of this skirt, meaning I need to take him off of this original plinth to glue that in. Which makes this part particularly stressful because I need to cut him off of the foam tape that adheres him to this painting block. The key here is to use a sharp blade and to slowly cut away into the tape, not where the tape meets the model. Now that the body is off of that painting plinth, we get to add his beautiful ratty tail. And that reminds me of something that's really important both for competition painting, but often for any kind of painting. And it has to do with the model and the base. What really sells a model being in a natural environment is that they're standing, they're jumping, they're running in a natural way on the base itself. So it's really important whether you're building in sub-assemblies or you're just test fitting a model to your built base that they're touching the base naturally and they settle into it where you want them to. Now that Vizic is assembled, I use blue tack to put him back down on his painting block, and of course this isn't nearly as strong and stable as the painter's tape, but it'll do for any touch-up painting. And quite frankly, I don't want to have a heart attack by having to take a hobby knife to my fully painted model a second time before the competition. As of the release of this video, I'll have about 10 days to finish up this project, and I still do have a lot of work to do, including all the work on his base. In the very first video of this series, I showed how I built the basic structure of both the underground tunnel within the base and the top street level section. Today, I'm feeling pretty grateful that I don't have to do all of that work now because it ended up being so much more ambitious of a build and more time intensive than I had expected. But there's still a lot of work to do in the detail side of this base to make it work. Now, there's not enough time for me to show the entire refinement and detail sculpting parts of this base, but there are a couple of tricks that I think would be really useful in your painting projects that I want to share. I can envision rock and dirt crashing out of this exposed tunnel that our ratty boys have dug, so to create a framework for that feeling of movement, I put dabs of UV resin on top of wax paper and let them drip down a bit before curing them with a UV flashlight. This stuff is really strong and durable once it's fully cured, but it has a bit of bend or flexibility to it, just enough to give me some options for how I glue it down and so it isn't too brittle when I attach all of those rocks and texture paste to it later. It's important to note that this stuff isn't actually going to be seen in the final piece. It's used as underlayment or structural supports to create what I'm hoping to create in a very durable way. I use it both for the sections of exploding rock on the bottom part of the tunnel, as well as that hanging earth structure that the earth is crumbling off of from the underside of the street. Now I use these little 2-scale bricks to create the cobblestone on the street level. And in the first video where I did this, some of you noted in the comment section that the mortar was too sunken in. It didn't feel realistic to cobblestones of that time. And you know what? You're right. That doesn't mean you're right about every comment you make. So let's do our best to improve that transition to feel more natural. And honestly, I'm approaching this like a home improvement project. I figure it's not too unlike mudding the drywall in your newly finished basement or crack filling your blacktop. The key here is to thin down the texture paste with enough water to create a thin slurry. From there, we can just pour it over the brickwork and use a little piece of plastic to spread it all around so it gets in every crack. From there, I can come in with a damp sponge or paper towel and remove all the excess, soak it up over the tops of the bricks themselves so that grit isn't covering the entire base. And you know what? For never having done this before, I'm pretty satisfied. It gives us that nice level of mortar just slightly below each of the raised bricks, but because the texture paste was quite thin, it did dry much quicker than I could remove it all. So I came back in with 600 grit sandpaper to remove the grit from some of those brick faces that had it still laying there. And after that, I'm definitely feeling like we're a lot closer to a realistic cobblestone street. Now there's still quite a bit of detail work sculpting that's going to have to be done, and that's going to take me some time. I need to make sure that those areas that feel like underground rock and cavern feel like actual rock. I'm also going to need to craft individual stones and place them just right as they've exploded out of the bottom side of this tunnel. One of the big things that I definitely need is to build up some rock texture and weight here. Much of this will be covered by earth texture paste or smaller grits of gravel, but it's good to get some variety and movement that the falling earth will cling to. This certainly is the biggest and most time-intensive project I've ever done, and I know that I've got a lot of work yet to do, but I really thought that sharing this step in the process was pretty important for me to make a video of. Maybe I'm just being a bit sentimental and losing my marbles a bit after all the hours painting this project, but it just felt really cool that I got to see the painted model assembled for the very first time while I recorded the footage for this video. And so in that way, you got to see it in the same point that I did. And yes, I see its imperfections. I know that I've got more work yet to do, but it gave me a second wave of excitement and energy for this project. And by making a video about those small positive victories that we get throughout a project, it kind of amped up my energy even more to make sure I see this thing all the way through. Because you know what? We all have ups and downs in any miniature painting project, whether it's a big one or a small one. It's important to take the time and be proud of those small victories and use those moments of positivity to fuel you towards the finish line or to carry over onto your next project. This seems like the best time to thank you for joining me on this Golden Demon journey, no matter what the outcome. I honestly could not have done this without your support. Because you watched these videos, because you were interested in the journey, I was able to keep putting more hours into this project, and I was able to actually see the light at the end of the tunnel of finishing this by the time Golden Demon hits. A special thank you to everyone who subscribed and watched every one of these videos in this series. You are awesome. And a special thank you to all the patrons that have supported me along the way, not just on this project, but on the channel itself, whether it's hanging out on Discord or seeing my behind the scenes stress in what I'm working on my weekly Wednesday videos. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a lot of work yet to do to finish this thing on time, so I need to get back to that. But sometime between now and my next video, just make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.